Matthew chapter 9, verses 35 to 38. Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them, because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the labourers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out labourers into his harvest field." Friends, this is my first presidential address to this synod since I returned from sabbatical leave in April, so I would formally like to record my heartfelt thanks to all of you who were praying for me while I was away and whose generosity in various ways enabled me to make the most of that opportunity. In particular, I'd like to record my thanks to Bishop Sophie for her readiness to take up additional responsibilities in my absence, and to my chaplain, Harry, and PA, Wendy, who also had to pick up additional slack at Bishopscroft, as well as to the other members of my magnificent senior staff team. I've now been back in harness for longer than I was away, but I am still feeling the benefit of the replenishment of body, mind and spirit I received. And I've said before, I really don't think I could have received more refreshment in the space available, so thank you. So, if I asked you to identify the three most significant threats to the realisation of our strategy, the three things most likely to prevent us from seeing the revitalisation of the Diocese of Sheffield, the three things that most likely might prevent us from fulfilling our vision to grow a sustainable network of Christ-like, lively and diverse Christian communities in every place, which are effective in making disciples and in seeking to transform our society and God's world, I wonder what you'd say. Because there are three threats which stand out for me, and the most alarming thing about the three is this: in each case, I don't think a solution can be found inside the Diocese of Sheffield. In each case, I think a national solution is required. So what are these three threats, in my opinion? Well, one we've already spoken about at some length this morning, and I'm not going to say much more about it now, and that's the LLF process. It's worth saying that the living in love and faith process is not equally destabilising in every diocese. Sheffield is among the dioceses where the direction of travel agreed at Synod on Monday is most contested. In Worcester, say, or Hereford, I'm told there's very little controversy, very little opposition to what is proposed, and very little threat, therefore, to the harmony of the diocese, very little threat to the strategy of the diocese. That's not the case here, as you're all well aware. That's partly why, in April, I accepted an invitation from the Archbishop of York to join the LLF programme board. That is where, over the next 6 months, the proposals which were agreed at Synod this week will be worked up and developed, and I would be grateful for your prayers as the members of that board seek the Lord's guidance for the way forward. I don't know if a major crisis can be averted, but I do believe the urgency of the situation is understood by the programme board, and that radical solutions will be explored in the coming months, commensurate with the degree to which the proposals are contested on both sides. The second obvious threat is financial. Pre-COVID, only a small minority of dioceses across the country were operating with deficit budgets. Post-COVID, only a small minority of dioceses are operating with surplus budgets. You will be shocked to learn, if you have not heard this statistic before, that the combined aggregate projected deficit for 2024 of the 40 mainland dioceses in the Church of England, that's to say, discounting the Diocese of Soda and Man, discounting the Diocese of Europe, the aggregate combined projected deficit for this year of the remaining 40 dioceses is over £60 million. That's an average deficit of 1.5 million, which means the Diocese of Sheffield is not an outlier, but bang on trend. The bad news is this is a severe crisis. So, of course, we must continue to be prudent with our spending. We must be prudent in maximising our revenues. But our deficit is, at least for now, structural. And ours is by no means the biggest budgeted deficit among dioceses. So a solution is urgently required from the national church institutions, and the good news is that the Archbishop's Council and the Church Commissioners do understand this. Also in April, I accepted an invitation to be part of something called the Diocesan Finances Review Group, which has been charged with making recommendations to the Archbishop's Council and the Church Commissioners. And again, I believe the proposals will be commensurate with the scale of the problem. To respond to Canon Mark Brown's question earlier in the meeting, the significance of the motion I steered through the General Synod in 2019 to 2020 is really not in the extent to which it will liberate rich dioceses to share their resources with poorer ones. It's the impact that that motion had in highlighting the inequalities. The real solution will need to involve the Church Commissioners, and I am anticipating both a short-term injection of funds to help dioceses like ours to bridge the current crisis, and a longer-term new settlement for the resourcing of dioceses nationwide, which I do believe will seek to mitigate the current inequalities. So I must be a sucker for punishment. We have an LLF crisis, and I've accepted an invitation to be in the thick of it. And we have a financial crisis, and I've accepted an invitation to be in the thick of that too. But if I'm honest with you, it's the third and last of the threats I want to name today, which is currently top of my worry list. And no, that isn't just because I haven't received an invitation to be part of any group exploring possible solutions. The final crisis is a double one. It's the difficulty we're experiencing in this diocese, and have been for 12 months, in filling vacancies for stipendiary incumbency posts. Again, that's a national trend. And a sharp decline nationwide in the number of those training for the ordained ministry. Now, please don't misunderstand me. In focusing for the next few minutes on stipendiary ordained ministry, I am not meaning to detract one bit from the value of lay ministries, including glorious focal ministries in this diocese, or the value of self-supporting ordained ministry, also glorious in this diocese. These contributions remain precious, but this is not a zero-sum game. Investing in stipendiary ordained ministry doesn't need to come at the expense of other ministries. And I want to focus there now on stipendiary ordained ministry, because that's where I see a crisis right now. Some of you may recall that I drew attention in my address to this synod in March 2022 to the number of vacancies for stipendiary incumbency posts in this diocese, and my fears about the implications if we were unable to fill them. And in fact, I asked you to pray. Thank God, we filled all 14 vacancies which we were able to afford in the rest of that year, and in the process attracted half a dozen able clergy from outside this diocese. You may also remember that in March 2022, I drew particular attention to the falling percentage of our stipendiary incumbents who were women. Between 2017 and 2022, that proportion fell from 28% to just 22%. Thank God, again, I believe in answer to our prayers, it is now 30%. I'm fairly confident that is the highest it has ever been. But since the end of 2022, we have struggled again. The story in 2023 and in the first half of 2024 is that we have all too often failed to attract any applicants for vacancies we have advertised. And it is now over 12 months since I last wrote an offer letter to someone outside this diocese. Thank God, even since I returned from sabbatical, I have written 6 offer letters to outstanding clergy. But all of them have been to curates within our diocese entering their first incumbencies. That speaks volumes for Bishop Sophie and our vocations team and the work that they've been doing in developing pipelines of highly able ordinands, but it is not enough. And then there's the national figure. And at that point, I would like to direct you to this other handout, which should have been on your chairs, because here you have three very sobering bits of data. First, look at the numbers of those who have been recommended for training for ordained ministry, stipendiary and self-supporting, since 2017. That year, it was 541, and it remained above 500 until 2021, reaching almost 600 in 2020. But then it fell by 5% to under 400, and it has remained there for the past 2 years. Then look below at the numbers of those who began training for ordained ministry. You'll see that both the number of those entering training for stipendiary ordained ministry and those training for self-supporting ordained ministry have declined sharply since 2020. The former by almost 50%, the latter by 40%. It's the bottom line, however, which is most sobering. Generally, you would expect the number entering ordained ministry in this table, the bottom one, to reflect the number recommended for training in the first table. But the bottom line of the lower table shows some variance. And in 2021, 25 people who were recommended for training chose not to enter training. And in 2023, that number was 37. Something's going on. Finally, take a look at the graph on the other side. Back in 2012, there were nationwide about 8,300 stipendiary clergy. That number has declined year on year to about 7,100 in 2022. The yellow line charts the projected numbers if we only ordain as new deacons for the next, say, 7 or 8 years, the numbers we have ordained in the past 2 years, around 250 a year. If we only ordain about 250 new deacons each year for the next 10 years, we will end up in 2033 with only about 5,400 stipendiary clergy nationwide because of the age profile of the current cohort, the numbers who will be retiring between now and 2023. Again, if you just extrapolate the trend from 2012 through to 2033, we'll end up with 6,100. That's about 1,000 fewer than we have now, and averaged across 40 dioceses would mean 25 fewer per diocese than we have now. And even the most optimistic forecast from the Triennium Funding Working Group, which is the body which authorises the spending of the Church Commissioners for every 3-year triennium period, even the most optimistic forecast by that group reckons we may have only 6,600 stipendiary clergy by 2033. So ministry, which is the board in the National Church Institutions, which oversees the various lay and ordained expressions of ministry across the Church of England. Ministry has been doing some analysis to identify the reasons for this decline, and they have come up with several factors. One is the pandemic. The great interruption of normal life also interrupted routines of vocational discernment, and so far normality has apparently not resumed. Another has been the introduction of a new 2-stage discernment process, which has still not quite settled down and bedded in. Another is undoubtedly the uncertainty that surrounds the living in love and faith process. Until this controversy is resolved, it is understandable that potential ordinands especially, but not only, at the two ends of the theological spectrum, are wary of entering into a discernment process. Yet another factor is the low level of the stipend and pension package. No one enters stipendiary ordained ministry in the hope of getting rich. But I saw a stat recently which suggested that the actual value of the clergy stipend has fallen by almost 30% since 2009, and it wasn't especially generous then. Some of you will have read the report by the Clergy Support Trust issued a few weeks ago, showing the extent to which demand for its financial assistance has grown markedly in the past few years. It's also possible that uncertainty around diocesan finances, uncertainty about the shape of the role of the stipendiary priest, is deterring some potential vocations. But this too is a nationwide crisis and a threat to the realisation of our vision and strategy. As you know, we're about to submit a major bid for additional financial resources from the National Church to invest in mission and ministry in this diocese, following the strategy refresh process so ably led by Alex Shilkoff, our Director of Strategic Programmes, and Malcolm Chamberlain, the Archdeacon of Sheffield and Rotherham. That bid will include an aspiration to grow the number of stipendiary clergy in this diocese. But it's no good having funding for additional posts if we can't find good people to fill them. So I have two challenges for you this morning. First, I am proposing to make Sunday, the 29th of September this year, the feast of Michael and all angels, and a traditional occasion for so-called Michaelmas ordinations, a day of prayer and fasting for an increase in vocations to stipendiary ordained ministry in this diocese. And we will be providing resources to help you to pray, and I urge you, please, to join in. I discovered in the preparation of this address that there is in fact to be a national day of prayer on the 13th of November, but I'm not prepared to wait till then. Secondly, may I urge you, please, to ask yourself, is there someone I know who might be called of God to the stipendiary ordained ministry at this time? Clergy, may I please encourage you in particular, as you seek to fulfil your vocation, to mobilise the whole people of God for the whole mission of God, to enable all the baptised to enter into the fullness of their baptismal vocation. Would you please consider the possibility that someone in your care is right now being called by God to the stipendiary ordained ministry? Clergy, I'd like to encourage you to remember those who supported you in the exploration of your vocation, and now to pay that debt forward. Maybe now is the moment for you to encourage others in their turn. Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and curing every disease and every sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the labourers are few. Therefore ask the Lord of the harvest to send out labourers into his harvest field." Thank you.